Phainon's current best teams utilize a team of 3 Harmony units, each of which is buffing Phainon's damage significantly. However, rumor has it that the newly revealed Preservation character, Dan Heng Terra, or Terra for short, is made to synergize with Phainon. So, how is a Preservation character like Terra supposed to contend with the buffing potential of a 3rd Harmony unit? What would Terra need in his kit in order to be worth slotting into Phainon teams over a 3rd Harmony unit? Let's discuss what we can expect from Terra if he's really planned to be the final puzzle piece in Phainon's best-in-slot team. When it comes to Phainon teammates, you're mainly looking for 2 things. First is their ability to give him core flume stacks for his ultimate, and second is their ability to buff his damage. This is why Phainon team building can be more complicated than you would think, because you want a team that can balance both of these things for Phainon. Triby's res pen and vulnerability are the biggest buffs to Phainon's damage by far, but she gives 0 core flame stacks. Tingyan is very efficient at front-loading core flame stacks for Phainon, but her damage buffing pales in comparison to the 5-star harmonies. It's all about striking a balance between damage and stack generation. This is why Phainon's current best teammates are Sunday and Saridra. Sunday is by far the best stack generator for Phainon at E0 S0, and Saridra is Phainon's biggest damage buffer. Not necessarily because of her buffing itself, but mostly due to the mechanic of Saridra's double meteors. So, what is Phainon looking for in a 3rd teammate to complete his best-in-slot team? Well, while Sunday and Saridra are fulfilling both spectrums of what he needs, stack generation plus damage buffing, he could of course always use more. In particular, Phainon needs a 3rd teammate who can generate stacks for his ultimate if he wants to manage 2 ultimates within the same cycle without relying on enemy RNG. Of course, enemy RNG can always change things, as can support Eidolons, but for now, we're going to be assuming an E0 S0 team. If you need an explanation on why Phainon is trying to manage 2 ultimates within the same cycle, watch the video linked in the description below for an in-depth guide on Phainon rotations. So, at E0 S0, the most consistent teammate to complete the team of Phainon, Sunday, and Saridra is none other than Bronya. Bronya gives respectable buffs, even if they are somewhat oversaturated, and even more than that, Bronya gives the most amount of core flame stacks after Sunday, which helps to reduce the amount of enemy RNG required to reach Phainon's 2nd ultimate in a timely manner. RMC would be next in line after Bronya in terms of balancing out damage buffs and core flame stacks due to how strong action advancing is for Phainon. So, with Bronya filling out the final slot in Phainon teams in terms of consistency, she is the one that Terravox is directly competing against. The question I have is, how is he going to round out Phainon teams? How can a Preservation unit possibly contend with the likes of a 3rd Harmony, in this case, Bronya? Well, let's start by looking at everything Bronya is offering to Phainon. In terms of buffing, Bronya provides 66% damage bonus from her skill, which increases to 76% damage bonus with her bonus ability. She gives 55% attack from her ultimate, increasing to 70% attack with her technique, and she gives roughly 52% crit damage if she has 200 crit damage, which is generally the upper goal you're aiming for in terms of Bronya's stats. Furthermore, the damage bonus she provides becomes more like 106% damage bonus, thanks to an extra 30% from her light cone, or an extra 32% if you're using her free-to-play option, like Past and Future. These are a lot of buffs that Bronya is providing, and it's hard to imagine a Preservation character buffing Phainon's damage by a similar amount. Based on what we know about Terra's current kit, this is what he's providing for Phainon at a baseline. Terra is rumored to have a mechanic where he attaches a summon to Phainon. While we don't know what this summon will do, one of its main purposes is to enable Phainon to benefit from the extra 50% damage bonus from Sunday's skill, since Sunday's skill only gives its full buff to a character if the character has a summon attached. So, thanks to Terra's synergy with Sunday, he's essentially enabling Phainon to gain 50% more damage bonus, plus an extra 45% damage bonus from Phainon's trace that gives Phainon damage bonus when Phainon receives healing or shielding. And it's safe to say that Terra will provide shielding, considering he's a Preservation unit. Don't look at Fuxuan. So, all in all, this is what Terra is providing at a baseline versus what Bronya is providing. There is obviously a massive gap in their buffing potential. Terra can't even keep up with the damage bonus buffing from Bronya, since free Preservation light cones don't have any buffing capabilities the way Harmony light cones do. And then there's the massive attack and crit damage buffs Bronya is providing. In order for Terravox to contend with those buffs, he would need a lot of his kit to be dedicated to damage amplification, which I think is very, very doubtful. Because if the rest of his kit is able to buff as much as Bronya's ultimate, this character might just become the most broken character in the entire game. Even if it came with caveats, like being single target and only lasting for 1 turn, so only Phainon could snapshot it and make full use of it in his ultimate. I just find it very unlikely for a Preservation unit to be able to buff as much as Bronya in his base kit. So, does this mean Terra is completely cooked? Well, not exactly. The fact that Terra would need a crazy amount of buffing in his kit to keep up with Bronya means that he probably can't replace her when it comes to buffing Phainon. But the thing is, he doesn't need to replace Bronya when it comes to buffing Phainon, because at the end of the day, Terra is there to fulfill one crucial role that is missing in Phainon teams: survivability. But not for Phainon. Phainon himself faces very little issues with survivability, particularly when he's inside of his ultimate. Phainon supports, on the other hand, will oftentimes just get chewed into bits and pieces by the likes of Hule whenever Phainon needs to spend time stacking up core flame stacks for a second ultimate. Usually, you have to just sit there and pray to the RNG gods that your supports survive the thrashing they're going to get while you're in the core flame stacking phase. Terra serves to fix this issue. This is why I say Terra doesn't need to compete with Bronya when it comes to buffing Phainon. I think it's perfectly fair and balanced for Terra to be a side grade to Bronya rather than a direct upgrade. A side grade that offers way more comfort and survivability and also gets rid of the need to reset for better RNG while still offering a decent amount of buffing, albeit obviously not quite on the level of Bronya. In other words, Bronya is the offensive option that causes you to pray to the RNG gods. Terra would be the defensive option that makes your Phainon clears much less scary and stressful. Current sustains just don't offer Phainon anywhere near enough, but Terra being a sustain that does offer enough, just not quite as much as Bronya, is definitely good enough to earn him a spot on Phainon's teams in some situations. He definitely wouldn't be a must-have for Phainon, but he would be the go-to option for safe and comfortable clears. But we aren't done just yet, because there's still more to talk about in regards to what Terra can offer Phainon beyond just damage buffing and survivability. We've touched upon how he offers a defensive option for Phainon teams that doesn't feel useless, but how exactly is he going to sustain Phainon's teams? I mainly posit this question because I know some people are concerned he's going to be a single target shielder, due to Phainon preferring teammates with skills that can target him directly, as well as rumors that his shield will affect a single target. There are multiple ways to get around this. It's very possible that his Trace spreads his single target shield to other allies, but for me, I think it's likely that Terra's shield will taunt enemies into attacking the target affected by the shield, similarly to March 7th's shield. In other words, if Terra puts the shield on Phainon, then enemies will be taunted into hitting only Phainon. This would further their synergy together because Phainon gains core flame stacks whenever enemies attack him. But wait, what about AoE attacks? Those will still hit the teammates who don't have a shield, right? Well, yes, but I don't think you'll have to worry about that. I'm sure Terra will have ways of mitigating that damage for the rest of your team in some way. I obviously can't predict exactly what it'll be. It could easily just be that his shield spreads to his teammates in some way, or it could even be a mechanic where he turns the shielded ally into Feixiao, so AoE attacks are all mitigated and transfer to the shielded target instead. But whatever the case, limited sustains nowadays are usually balanced with comfort being the #1 aspect of their kit. So I definitely don't think you need to worry about Terra's ability to have ways of sustaining the whole team, even if his shield is for a single target. Now, speaking of Phainon gaining core flame stacks from taunting enemies, this is the final big piece of the puzzle in terms of what Phainon is looking for from his last teammate slot. How can Terra possibly compare to Bronya in terms of core flame stack generation? If Terra relies entirely on enemies taking a turn to attack Phainon to generate core flame stacks, then that's a bit too volatile, right? Well, let's look at how many core flame stacks Bronya generates over the course of 2 ultimate rotations. In the first rotation for Phainon, Bronya will get 1 skill in 1 ultimate, which is 2 core flame stacks. In addition, the action advance from her skill allows Phainon to skill, which equates to 2 more core flame stacks, for a total of 4 core flame stacks in the first rotation. On a second rotation, Bronya just uses 1 skill, which is 1 core flame stack plus an extra 2 core flame stacks from her action advance enabling Phainon to skill, which puts her at 3 core flame stacks on the second rotation. All in all, Bronya generates 7 core flame stacks over the course of 2 ultimate rotations for Phainon. How can Terra possibly match this? If we assume Terra's skill and ultimate will both target Phainon just like Bronya, then that's 2 core flame stacks. As you can see, without any form of action advance, the ability to generate core flame stacks for Phainon becomes a massive hurdle. However, remember the summon we mentioned? The summon that Terra is rumored to be able to attach to Phainon? It's hard to say what exactly the summon will do, but I highly suspect that this summon will be the way in which Terra generates stacks for Phainon. Simply because if it doesn't help with core flame stack generation, then Terra is sort of a dead slot in Phainon teams. So the summon sort of has to help with core flame stacking. Let's say that every time Phainon takes a turn, the summon also takes a turn, and every time the summon takes a turn, it's able to target Phainon with a shield or something, thus generating 1 core flame stack for Phainon. This would essentially mean that Terra generates 1 extra stack for Phainon every time Phainon takes a turn. So if we assume Phainon takes 2 turns by going Phainon, Sunday, Phainon, Terra would give Phainon 2 core flame stacks just from that turn order. If Phainon takes this turn order with Sunday again in his second ultimate rotation, then that's another 2 core flame stacks. Combine that with Terra's skill in ultimate, and Terra is giving a respectable 6 core flame stacks over the course of 2 ultimate rotations, compared to Brana's 7. This is assuming Terra only uses his skill once as well, unlike Bronya, who uses her skill twice. If we assume Terra also uses his skill in the second rotation, then he's actually able to match Brana's stack generation at 7. Then, on top of all of this, if Terra's shield really does taunt enemies into hitting Phainon, then he could potentially offer even more core flame stacks from there, and any extra core flame stacks that we don't need equates to more skill points, since suddenly Phainon or Terra can start using their basic attacks instead of their skills if Phainon is getting extra core flame stacks stacks from taunting enemies to hit him. What this means is that, under the assumption that Terra's summon helps him give Phainon core flame stacks at a similar speed that Bronya does, Terra can match Bronya's stack donation while spamming his skill, and under really good scenarios where Phainon is getting hit a lot, assuming Terra helps Phainon get hit a lot, Terra can make the team much more skill point positive than Bronya in good scenarios. I think that's more than good enough for Terra to be viewed as a comfortable side grade to Bronya. He brings comfort in terms of survivability and skill point consumption, and in his worst case scenarios where he has to spam his skill just as much as Bronya, he's still able to keep up with her stack generation. As a trade-off to the fact that he can be way more comfortable than Bronya on these fronts, his damage buffing is obviously going to end up much lower than hers, given that she is a Harmony unit. But Terra also isn't buffing Phainon by 0, since he enables an extra 95% damage bonus, which is way more than any other sustain, which makes Terra worth slotting in as a situational sustain option if you want the choice to run a Phainon team with an actual worthwhile sustain. Now, there is one other thing I want to mention that I think we could expect from Terra: personal damage. Hold on. I know how traumatized we all are from Saridra and her awful, abysmal, terrible, horrible, no good personal damage traces. One thing that I think would be really cool for Terra, however, is if the summon he places on Phainon can actually still attack enemies while Phainon is in his ultimate state. So basically, in between every Phainon action inside of his ultimate's territory, Terra's dragon will also attack, sort of like a follow-up attack, but probably not counted as an actual follow-up attack. Furthermore, since the summon is now attached to Phainon, I think it would make a lot of sense if the summon's damage scaled off of Phainon's stats, at least to some degree. The multipliers would still be tied to Terra, but it could inherit the crit stats and the damage percent bonus stats of its host, aka Phainon, and that would allow its damage to actually be relevant. This could even be taken one step further, with Terra having shields and damage that scales off of attack, thus allowing him to also benefit from the massive attack stat that Phainon gets during his ultimate. It would be really unique to get an attack scaling preservation character. And the reason I actually like the idea of Terra's summon having personal damage and putting part of his kit's power budget into his own personal damage is because it makes sense with Terra's kit identity for Phainon teams. Terra is supposed to be a more comfortable option in Phainon teams, and Phainon teams that actually need the defensive and comfortable option are more than likely going to be Phainon teams with somewhat lower investment, such as no limited Eidolons on the team. The less investment that your Phainon has, the more Terra's personal damage is going to matter, since your Phainon's damage is also going to be a bit on the lower end, especially when being run with a sustain. On the other hand, the higher the investment level on your Phainon, the more Phainon is going to benefit from additional buffers, and the less Phainon is going to even need or want a defensive option to begin with, especially once he starts being able to clear in one ultimate. Therefore, by putting more of Terra's power budget in his own personal damage, he's more useful in the situations where you would want him, while still being balanced by not having enough buffs in his kit to compete with the likes of Bronya in terms of pure offense for a higher investment Phainon. Because a preservation unit with too much buffing in his kit would, once again, just be broken. Think of it like Hyacinth. In her base kit, Hyacinth's buffing potential is rather minimal. A 30% HP buff, which, don't get me wrong, is very good for the characters she synergizes with, is nothing too crazy. Just like how Terra enabling 95% damage bonus for Phainon would be very good, but nothing crazy compared to dedicated buffers. Most of Hyacinth's power budget, in addition to being a comfortable sustain, goes into her personal damage. I wouldn't be surprised if they take a similar direction for Terra's kit. A kit that combines defensive utility, comfort, and personal damage for Phainons who need the comfort. And then, as your Phainon graduates to higher investment, it begins to need the comfort and the personal damage from Terra less and less, which allows you to replace Terra with a third Harmony unit to go all in on Phainon's damage. I think this is a perfectly healthy spot for Terra to be in terms of game design. He doesn't need to outdo a third Harmony slot in every situation, and heck, he can straight up lose to every other final slot in Phainon teams in terms of pure damage buffing, but as long as he offers his own niche to make him worthwhile in Phainon's teams in certain situations for certain players, and most likely the majority of players, then that is a perfectly balanced spot for Terra to hold in Phainon teams. So while I know we've made a lot of assumptions about Terra's kit, let me summarize what Terra would need to be capable of doing in order to be worth a spot in Phainon teams. First and foremost, he needs to comfortably fulfill the sustain slot in Phainon teams, not just for Phainon, but for Phainon's teammates as well. This is the main reason you would use him over Bronya after all. However, he also needs to offer more than the likes of Aventurine or even Huohuo if he wants to be worth using with Phainon over other sustains. Then is damage buffs for Phainon. Terra will never buff Phainon's damage by the same amount as a Harmony unit at E0 S0. It just isn't happening unless this character is going to be super busted. At a baseline, assuming he offers a summon and a shield, he can provide up to 95% damage bonus by enabling Sunday and Phainon's own kits, which is more than good enough damage amplification for a sustain. It's more than Huohuo's attack buff at the very least, which would immediately help Terra be the best sustain for those who want to play Phainon without worrying about dying. Next is core flame stack generation. If Terra hopes to replace Bronya, he needs to at least be able to match her in his worst case scenario, which he would be fully capable of doing if his summon gives a core flame stack to Phainon every time Phainon takes a turn, or something to this degree, in addition to Terra having a skill in ultimate that can target Phainon and give Phainon stacks directly. correctly. If his shield is able to taunt Phainon to guarantee stacks from Phainon getting hit by enemies as well, then that'd be even better, albeit how useful it is would depend on enemy matchup and how fast the enemies you're facing are. So he definitely shouldn't be dependent on taunt value in order to generate stacks for Phainon. It's more of an added bonus that allows him to situationally be the best stack generator for Phainon in certain enemy scenarios. Similarly to how one of Hyacine's main benefits for Caceres is being the best stack generator for Caceres' ultimate. But if Terra is going to be the comfortable option for Phainon teams, then he should also bring some comfort in terms of skill point intensity. Bronya obviously is one of the main factors that can cause Phainon teams to be very skill point hungry. Terra wouldn't automatically fix this issue by having any actual SP generation in his kit, but the fact that he can situationally cause Phainon to reach enough core flame stacks without even needing to skill, thanks to the added taunt value, would essentially equate to more SP being saved in a lot of scenarios, since it allows the team to basic attack more often. And last but not least is personal damage while inside of Phainon's ultimate. This is mostly just following the pattern of Hyacine and Linxia, and to a lesser extent Aventurine. But I would expect Terra to offer his own personal damage, partially because the summon he's attaching to Phainon surely has to do something aside from just stack generation and refreshing its shield on Phainon. By being able to contribute his own personal damage while inside of Phainon's ultimate, it would just make a lot of sense, considering Terra is presumably meant to fulfill the role of being the comfortable teammate option for Phainons who are at lower investment levels and could use an additional source of chip damage while inside of Phainon's ultimate. Hopefully Terra's personal damage would be more than Ceridra at least. It would explain why Terra is physical too, because if you're pairing him with Phainon, who you mostly want to take to enemies who are already weak to physical, then it means Terra's damage will also be at maximum potential since the enemy is weak to both his and Phainon's element. Furthermore, Phainon's physical implant would mean Terra can help contribute to toughness damage inside of Phainon's ultimate, which can be relevant for Apocalyptic Shadow, which is another reason I expect Terra's dragon to be attacking while inside of Phainon's territory. Those are all of the things Terra would need in order to be a comfortable final option in Phainon's teams. Not necessarily as a definitive best in slot for Phainon, but more like a defensive and comfortable side grade to Bronya. If Terra is able to help lower investment Phainons clear in the same amount of cycles as Bronya, thanks to his own personal damage and everything else he offers, while making it a more comfortable clear, then that is a perfectly acceptable spot for Terra to be in. And then, if Terra gets ditched by higher investment Phainons, who benefit more from higher damage buffers and don't need the comfort that Terra provides, then I think that's completely fair too. Especially considering rumors about Terra potentially being given out for free, when Hoyo have already announced that we'll get another free character sometime this year. It is very possible that Terra is meant to be a free, comfortable side grade option for lower investment Phainons. If this is his role, and as long as he's still able to be a perfectly comfortable sustain on the level of Aventurine and Fu Xuan when outside of Phainon teams still, then I think this would make for a perfectly acceptable kit for Terra. This, of course, isn't even taking into account his signature light cone or Eidolon investment. If Terra is suddenly able to keep up with other buffers for Phainon with his E1, like if it adds more defense threat to Phainon's teams in addition to Phainon's light cone and Sunday and Ceridra's E1, then I think that would make a lot of sense as a way to keep Terra on Phainon teams, especially since investing in Sunday's E1 would directly buff the damage of Terra's summon, which is another thing that sort of implies Terra's summon will do damage and that he can remain relevant in Phainon teams with further investment into him. But at E0, S0, and especially if he is indeed free, I think it's perfectly fine for Terra to find himself fulfilling the role of a comfortable, defensive side grade to Bronya for Phainon, without being the definitive best in slot option for all scenarios, especially in scenarios where Phainon would want the higher buffing of a third Harmony unit instead of Terra. All of this while still being an Aventurine level sustain in terms of comfort levels for other teams. That sounds perfectly fine to me. And if he really is free, even better. But those are just my thoughts on what Terra would need to provide to be worthwhile on Phainon teams, as well as my expectations for his kit, while being realistic, since I doubt Hoyo is just going to make him the most broken character in the game with 50% res pen in his kit at E0, S0, or anything ridiculous like that. What do you expect from Terra's kit? What are you hoping for in Terra's kit? Would you be satisfied with him being a general sustain who mainly serves as a comfortable and worthwhile side grade in Phainon teams? Or would you want more from him at E0, S0? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Not just your thoughts on my kit, but your personal desires and theories, and how you would design his kit. If you found the video enjoyable, consider liking and subscribing. I would really appreciate it, and I would love to make more content just like this. Not just for Terra, but fan-made kits in general. It was honestly a ton of fun theorizing this sort of thing. There will definitely be a ton more Terra content coming very soon to this channel, especially once his beta starts and I get my hands on him, which will be roughly around the same time patch 3.5 begins. So please look forward to that. I have covered everything about Phainon teams in so much detail, and so you can definitely count on me to keep covering how things change or don't change for Phainon with the incoming introduction of Terra. Whether he improves Phainon or not, I'm certain there's going to be a lot to talk about in regards to Phainon teams once we get the official kit for Terra. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and let's keep theorizing, praying, hoping, and having fun with Phainon as we look forward to what Terra will bring for us in the near future, especially if he really does end up being free. Until next time!